Hello everyone, Deshidele, and welcome to another episode of Tibet Talks. Today, our guest is a New York Times best-selling author and teacher of Tibetan meditation. Many of you know her. A first encounter with Buddhism as a college student in 1969 sparked an interest that took her on a journey to India to study meditation. Returning to the United States 5 years later, she began to teach. In 1976, she co-founded the Insight Meditation Society in Barre, Massachusetts, and 13 years later, she co-founded the Barre Center for Buddhist Studies. Today, she offers a variety of teachings around the globe and is the author of 11 books, including Lovingkindness and her latest book, Real Change, on how to embody fundamental principles of mindfulness practice towards creating social change and a better world for all. So please join me to welcome our guest of the hour, Sharon Salzberg. Sharon is a long supporter of ICT and a dear friend. Thank you so much for joining us today, Sharon.
Oh, well, thank you so much.
Thank you, Sharon. And then, as always, I want to invite ICT President Matteo to join as moderator today. Hi, Matteo.
Hello, Tencho. Hello, Sharon. Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Good to see you both. And for our online viewers, we will be taking questions at the end of the conversation. So if you have questions, please post them on the live stream below the Facebook live stream. Or if you're watching on our website, you can email it to us at comments@savetibet.org. Thank you. And I'll hand over to Matteo.
Thank you, Tencho. And thank you, Sharon, again for joining us today. So we are very happy to have you with us. You're a well-known and accomplished, meditation teacher and, one of the pioneers of Buddhist meditation in the U.S. And you've been teaching for many years, as Tencho has mentioned in the introduction, and actually for a period of time also in our ICT office in Washington, D.C. So it's good to be back with you and to have you with our community today. So as we begin this conversation, I think it could be helpful, despite your, curriculum and books, but maybe if you can share a little bit more, from your personal point of view, what led you to choose this path in your life and to become a Buddhist meditation teacher?
Yes, thank you. So wonderful to be together again, actually. Well, that's a question in two parts. I went to India in 1970. I was a university student. And the year before, I had taken an Asian philosophy course, which honestly, as I look back, was kind of happenstance. It fit nicely into the schedule that I was devising. So I thought, I'll do that one. And it completely changed my life. It was in the context of that course that I really first learned about Buddhism and I first learned about meditation. And what I heard from the point of view of the teachings was the Buddha saying, suffering is a part of life. And I had had a very kind of traumatic, difficult childhood. And like for many people, this was never really spoken about in my family. And I always felt somewhat isolated and different from other people. And here was the Buddha saying right out loud, this is a part of life, which was another way of saying you belong. And I found that breathtaking, that everybody, not that we all suffer to the same degree, because we don't, but we're also vulnerable, and that there's a possibility of finding one another in that vulnerability, really caring for one another. So that was actually a big upheaval in my life. And then I heard that there was a thing called meditation. There were actually methods that you could use that if you use them, you could be a whole lot happier. So I was going to college in Buffalo, New York. I looked around Buffalo. I didn't see it anywhere. And I devised this independent study project and presented it to the university. I said, I want to go to India and learn how to meditate. So education, I guess, was kind of wilder and freer then. And they said, sure. So I went with my student loans and my scholarships off to find a teacher. And I did find a teacher. I found several teachers. I began practicing meditation. In all honesty, I stayed longer than my year. And then I went back to Buffalo, finished school, I ended up getting 2 years of independent study credit, went back to India to continue practice. And I finally came back in 1974 as a teacher. So that's kind of the second part of your question. I thought I was coming back to the States for a very short trip, like to renew my visa and do things like that. And then I was going to go back to India for the rest of my life. And I went to see one of my teachers, this woman named Deepa Ma, who, which is of course a nickname, like meaning Deepa's mother, but she lives in Calcutta, and she had been a very important teacher for me. So I went to say goodbye and basically just get her blessing for my short trip home. And she told me, when you go home, when you go back to the States, you'll be teaching. And I said, no, I won't. And she said, yes, you will. I said, no, I won't. She said, yes, you will. I said, no, I won't. So that was I don't know if it's inauspicious, but that was the beginning of my teaching career, because I came back not thinking that at all. But it turned out, of course, she was correct. People started inviting us to lead retreats. And I thought, well, I'll just do this retreat and then I'll go back. And then I'll do this other retreat, then I'll go back. And then one day I woke up and I thought, oh, she was right. So here I am.
Yeah. So you were one of the first, I guess, Buddhist meditation teacher. Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit about the environment, those years? Who were the people interested? Who were the other, pioneers? Let's put it this way.
Yeah, well, there was the wave of people, like me, who had gone to Asia. Joseph Goldstein, for example, and I in India, Jack Cornfield in Thailand, having a parallel life, people going to Nepal, certainly, finding teachers. And something that intrigues me a lot is that the accessibility was so rare that you had to be highly, highly motivated in order to try to find these tools. And so I was 18 years old. I went to India before I'd ever been to California. And I was not unusual in the sense that you had to do that. You had to do something very intense in order to actually have access to teachings and to methods. And so it's not, of course, that way anymore. But coming back was really interesting because meditation was often considered exotic or removed from day-to-day life and kind of woo-woo, and so I'd be at a party or some social situation and introduced as a meditation teacher, and people would often kind of sidle away a little bit, it's like, oh, that's weird. Or occasionally somebody would ask me, well, did you meet the Beatles when you were over there? I'd say, no, sadly, they went when I was in high school, and besides, it's a different tradition altogether. But these days, the most common response, I mean, we don't have parties right now, but the most common response I would hear recently would be, oh, I'm so stressed out, I could use some of that. So I think there's been a very different growing understanding. In the beginning, the people who came to retreats were basically either people who'd been in India with us or people who had long wanted to learn some methodologies and some techniques. And then we watched the waves happen. Older people started coming once they'd retired who were looking for a new lease on life. And then younger people started coming, and then artists and scientists. And it's been very interesting.
Yeah. So definitely there has been probably a tectonic shift in perception of what it is meditation, what it can do to people. But I think that there are still a lot of people who would like to learn more. And so I think you are a teacher, but naturally you're a practitioner first. So if you could simply share what are the benefits that you personally have taken out of this practice, and maybe people, if are interested, they could look into that.
Yes, certainly. And I'm relying on my practice quite a lot these days myself, personally. So I feel very close to that question. And some of it is like foundational exercises, being able to center, not be so incredibly caught up in thoughts and feelings and all the many things that come and go, not dismissing them or trying to get rid of them, but just getting a little bit of space. So being able to center, being able to be with some very difficult feelings of say, grief and anger and fear and so on, without adding to it the things we normally add to them. This is only me, that sense of isolation rather than a sense of community, judgment rather than compassion for oneself, kind of seemingly unchanging future, like I'm only going to feel this forever. This is really me, like an identification with those feelings. So it's a very different way of being with painful experience, and a very different way of being with joyous, wonderful experiences, because it's hard to remember that it's okay, you know, to look at the joy that life is also delivering to us. And more than anything, I think the practice and the teachings give us a profound sense of connection to others. And I always thought that was kind of weird, actually, because if you're meditating, you might be all alone. That might be your habit. Maybe your eyes are closed, but somehow this very genuine recognition of how interconnected our lives are arises, and that changes everything, because here we are, a lot of people are in physical isolation, though not everybody. And even before the pandemic, I kept reading how there was like an epidemic of loneliness happening in many places, and people are, you know, have been studying for some time the value of social connection, the role of social connection in healing modalities. And I kept thinking that can't just be a question of numbers, like you have only 2 friends, you need 8, you know. It's some inner sense of knowing our lives are all interdependent. And I believe that's true, that's what actually is the factor that helps toward healing and ending this sense of loneliness. And so that has probably been the most important benefit that I've gotten.
Yeah. And actually, this brings us to your latest book that, you know, Tencho has mentioned. It's available on Amazon and everywhere you want. You know, you can buy a book, Real Change, Mindfulness to Heal Ourselves and the World. So clearly in the book, you make a strong case on how, you know, mindfulness, loving kindness can help each of us individually to deal with the anxieties, the fears. And I think in this moment, everybody, you know, probably understand this much better, because we are all going through, you know, this pandemic and the upheavals, you know, that has produced in our lives. But what I found very interesting is that you also make a strong case that this practice needs to translate into action. And without action, I don't know, I don't want to put my words in your mouth, but, you know, there are some limits to the impact of this practice that you can have. So can you explain, you know, our audience is an audience that are very much engaged in social action to help the Tibetan people preserve their identity and cultures. So can you explain to our audience that, you know, probably they are engaged at that level? You know, what are the benefits of also the individual practice, and also how the two connect with each other? How are both important?
Well, I think my road to really speaking more directly to activism actually came because in the beginning of our teaching or presentations, just like when I was teaching at ICT, everything was just open. You know, whoever showed up, and I also got to learn a lot about lots of different kinds of people that way. But more as time went on, I would begin teaching more specifically for groups that we call caregivers. I actually think there needs to be a better word, but I'm not sure what it is. Either people who in their personal lives were caring, say, for a family member, but mostly people who in their professional lives were caring for others, people who I would consider really being on the front lines of suffering. It started with domestic violence shelter workers through this program through the Garrison Institute, and then international humanitarian aid workers, people say working in the refugee camps in Syria and other places, and these days back domestically, frontline medical personnel, not only doctors and nurses, but like ambulance drivers and EMTs and people like that. And these are people who have enormous empathy for others and sense of caring and are taking action and often are burning out for other reasons. And so as much as I appreciate kind of a cultural message these days of the need for empathy training, and which is true, it's a very cold and cruel world without any empathy for one another. These people have plenty of empathy, but they're burning out. And so all the programs I was involved in were kind of resiliency programs, helping to just offer tools, which are like an experiment. Are these tools actually helping you sustain your work? And then I thought, these are really like activists. It's the greatest similarity. People on the front lines of suffering, dealing with what might seem an intractable problem, day by day, needing to find inspiration and balance, some balance between caring for themselves and caring for others, or some balance between being wholehearted in one's effort and not getting an immediate result always, and needing to not just fall into discouragement. And so that became a really big interest of mine in trying to help sustain that.
Yes, certainly. And I think, some of our audience and, some of our members probably can relate to that, because if you think also about the Tibet freedom movement, which is now more than 30 years old in the West. I mean, ICT was founded, over 30 years ago. And there have been people, and, many of our members also have been with us for a long time, 25 years, 30 years, 20 years. So there is an element of resilience there, which I think it's very important. And in my view, it needs to be connected also with your inner world, because unless you have that, there's really a risk of burning out. Because if you put a lot of energy into something that does not produce results, and there's a lot of frustration, then, you become, sometimes you blame your neighbor, sometimes you blame yourself, and then it's over. So I think those are important conversations, I think, during this time for those who are involved in social activism and social change. And so, one of the quotes that we use in our, communication with our members from His Holiness the Dalai Lama is that it's not enough to be compassionate, we must act. So on the other hand, you have, let's put it this way, the meditation crowd, the Dharma community. Do you see there a need to have more, action-oriented practice, that you just don't, take care of yourself? You certainly have to take care of yourself, but how do you translate this into something more meaningful?
Yeah, I definitely see that. And in some ways, I wrote the book with a bi-directional flow, because clearly I know a lot of meditators. I've been teaching since 1974. And I see what I believe is a genuine transformation for many, many people from just having a life to becoming more compassionate, because we pay more attention. We do have a deeper sense of interconnection. We find we care. We really do care more about others, but that doesn't always translate into action. And some of that lack, I think, is people feel I could never do enough. Anything I do would be so small, so insignificant, so I won't do anything, and we actually don't have that sense of agency, of going forward and taking just one step, doing the good that's in front of you. I learned that in many ways from His Holiness, that you can't disregard or discount some action because it seems too small. You have to do it. And the doing of it is transformational itself, and that's what's onward leading. But I see that many, many times. And also, I think that something that's very pertinent to the Mahayana teachings and Tibetan teachings in particular is looking more deeply at causes and conditions. And so the example I've used forever is, I know countless people who said to me, I began meditating and I was taking a walk and somebody on the street asked me for $1 and I gave them $1 because that's my practice. But this is the first time I ever looked that person in the eye and realized that was a human being. But what that person talking to me may not go on to investigate is, what's the housing policy in this city that there's so many people living on the street? And that's an important ingredient, that kind of analysis, to realize that there are systems of oppression, for example, that are in place that we need to use our intellect to really evaluate, so that when we take that one small step, it's in the context of a big view. We have to hold both kind of a larger view and the efficacy of one small step. It's not nothing.
Yes. What I've heard sometimes, and I don't know if it's, it cannot be applied to everybody, but I think one of the obstacles people are facing is that they see politics as something contentious, something controversial, where there is conflict. And I think, the practice of meditation now is try to stay calm, to deal with your feelings, not to, be dominated by your feelings. My background is from activism, from politics, since I was a teenager. So I always felt that I needed to put that energy to find inner peace, to have, to achieve justice, etc. But I understand, people come from different, backgrounds and, personal histories. So what do you say, to your, students who say, but I don't want to get involved in politics. You see, all the, rage, the conflict there. How do you advise them to take meaningful action without getting, absorbed by that negative emotions?
Well, I think that's the whole point, right? So maybe that person needs to reform politics, mm-hmm. so that it's not. I don't mean to disparage emotion, but sometimes our view is distorted because we're too lost in the emotion. And that if we could only have a little bit more space, we might see options that are not available. Or we all know that someone can walk into a meeting with a strong fixation on one resolution, and then maybe 50 resolutions are presented, but they're not even heard, because someone is so attached or fixated to that one idea that they had. And we might all benefit from a little bit more space and spaciousness and an ability to kind of look without so much attachment and anger and so on, and take stronger action and actually more effective action because of that. So I don't think that they're dissimilar. I think the strengths actually lend themselves to one another. But you're totally right. I'm a big advocate of voting, and here we are in the United States, just before a presidential election. And I've talked to many people who say, well, but here I think our genuine sense of interconnection is what carries the day, because you may not feel that impassioned about a candidate, for example, but a small policy difference might make a huge difference in someone else's life. And if we weren't so insulated from one another, we might recognize that, well, that makes a difference, and I need to participate. I need to engage. Do we need to get divisive and horrible? Well, no, hopefully not. And that world could probably use a little cooling out as well. But I see the benefit, or the main design of meditation is more toward insight or wisdom rather than only calm. We use that calm, or we establish the calm, so that we can see more clearly.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I think, probably we need more meditation teachers like you who who challenge people to try, to find that inner wisdom and looking for common ground with others, also with people who may have different opinions, completely different opinions on many things, but there may be something on which you can agree. So don't get discouraged. Don't stop, in front of the obstacles. As we are, talking to our audience, I think they would like to hear more also. If you have anything to share personally of your interactions with His Holiness Dalai Lama or with, Tibetan Buddhism, I think that would be nice for you to share.
Yeah, I feel incredibly lucky that I have had, interactions with His Holiness and Tibetan Buddhism. My first Tibetan teacher was in 1971. And I guess there are a couple of stories about when His Holiness came to visit our center at the Insight Meditation Society, which we'd established in 1976. And I was very young. I was 23 when we started it. And my colleagues were young as well, though a little bit older. And we'd heard in 1979 that His Holiness was coming to Amherst, which is only, like 45 minutes away, to visit Bob Thurman, who at the time was a professor there in Amherst. And so we were very naive, and we thought, maybe he'll come visit us too. So we sent off a letter to the private office and said, well, we're a Buddhist center too. Maybe he'd like to come here. And to our astonishment, we got a letter back saying, yeah, he'd come. So then we had to get ready. And while security was nothing like it is now, still it was very rigorous for us. And the center is on this little country road called Pleasant Street, about 2 miles from town. And we had to have it blockaded by state troopers, and we had troopers on the roof with guns, patrolling, and it was like kind of terrifying. And just before His Holiness was coming, I'd been in a car accident, and I had a broken bone in my foot, and I was using crutches, which I was not very skilled with. I was very clumsy. So, the day came that he was arriving, and I was standing in the back outside, the back of about 100 people waiting to greet him, and feeling very sorry for myself. I thought, I helped start this place and I can't even be up front. And what an amazing occasion. And I'm stuck in the back. I should go up front. But if I go up front, I'll probably fall on my face in front of him. That'd be even worse. I better stay in the back. But I'm in the back. And I was really kind of miserable. And then His Holiness's car pulled up and he got out and he did something I've seen him do many times since, which is that he seems to have almost a kind of radar for who in a crowd is suffering the most, and he goes there, and that was me. And he just I don't even know how he had time to see me visually, got up out of the car, cut through 100 people, took my hand, looked me in the eye, and said, what happened? And that actually was a shift in my understanding of compassion, which has never changed, in that he couldn't make the accident not have happened, and he couldn't make me any more skillful with the use of the crutches, but that horrible feeling of being so alone, uncared for, stuck in the back, unseen, it was gone just by him coming right there. And so it was the beginning of his trip to the Insight Meditation Society. We went inside. When we bought the place, it was a Catholic novitiate, so we have had a lot of social amenities, from the novices. We have still a 1-lane bowling alley, and at the time they had left us all these bowling pins and things like that. His Holiness did go bowling. That's true. Everyone asked me how did he do, and I said, I don't remember. It's just in some state, but he picked up a bowling ball and actually threw it down the lane. And then he gave a talk, and because we had a retreat that was ongoing, and the talk was followed by questions and answers. And some young man raised his hand and said, basically, I've been meditating for 2 weeks and I don't think I can do it. I don't think I have any capacity inside of me to learn or to grow or to understand things. I don't have it. I can't do it. And His Holiness listened to him, and then he looked at him and said, you're just wrong. You're just wrong. Like, everybody has a capacity. And that statement, you're just wrong, in a time of intense personal discouragement, or when I'm looking at somebody, sometimes I don't phrase it like that, but, and people feel they have so little capacity. And I think, no, you're wrong. And it was like the single most encouraging statement I've ever heard.
Yes, thank you. And in the next few days, actually, we'll also be involved in the summit, the Dalai Lama Global Vision Summit, which will be online. And so it will focus, I think it's over a week, on some of the practices, of His Holiness and His teachings. Can you share also with our audience a little bit about that, how you will be involved, and if you know more about this program?
Yeah, I got involved because Bob Thurman asked me to do something, which I was obviously, very grateful for the chance to do. And it seems to be that it's an entire year or something, like where people are really trying to honor His Holiness, and that is just one little part of it. The summit where people are offering their personal experiences and their sense of the impact, because His Holiness's impact has been unfathomable. I don't even know how you would measure it, and is ongoing. At the same time, when you and I spoke about sometimes watching him give teachings now online, and I'm so charmed because he's like kind of a little bit like the rest of us, in his own way, like talking to nobody, I'm just looking at a screen, and then he spots a friend on the screen, like, oh, there's Bob Thurman. Oh, I see your face, and then all of a sudden it's different. And just sort of watching him be so masterful in the end of a whole new medium and be able to convey so much just looking at a screen. It's really been delightful.
Yes. And yeah, so it will be taking place, I think, from today or tomorrow. So if people want to check it out, it's everybody can access, free access, and it's called the Dalai Lama Global Vision Summit. So people can go online and find out more about the programs. Going back to your book, still have it here, Real Change. Check it out. So for this book, I mean, it's focused on real change, right? Connecting your inner practice with, social change. So you have interviewed a few people who, some of them you have mentioned, in different areas. Do you want to mention one or two of them that, you thought would be important for you to highlight in your book, and why?
Yeah, I think I learned so much from every one of those people. One person actually was a man who had worked in in Haiti and Congo, in various places, with various agencies, and found himself like incredibly burnt out. And the part that was hard, I think hardest, was that he was ashamed of what he was going through, and that there's a kind of stigma to needing help, or not only being the giver, or the person helping. And sort of his process in learning to receive as well as give was very profound to witness, and actually I was a part of, because I was teaching him meditation, and to see how, many times the structure of an organization or something is actually not fully supporting their employees or their staff, and recognizing, what it's like to, to be so young, for example, and having to make decisions about, should I evacuate my staff, or this looks dangerous, or there's a cholera epidemic, or, whatever. And so I would hope that as people can give voice more to their stories, that more organizations will rally around, or this, even just that this idea of mental health is not stigmatized in any way. And I have a friend who is also in the book, who was very, very involved in the marriage equality movement in the States, or same-sex marriage as we call it. And he would talk about things like a 15-year campaign, which of course, when you think of Tibet, seems very short, but like 15 years was a lot of years. And I'd say, how did you find the patients? How did you? And he said, I just decided that every single day I was going to try to put one win on the board. That could be one conversation, or an editorial in a newspaper, or something. And I knew it was going to be step by step by step. And I knew that it was going to be when people understood other people's stories, when they could hear other people's stories, so that the question wasn't statistics or something abstract. It was a human being who, say, wanted to adopt a child or something like that. And that's when things began to change. But I kept thinking, 15 years, it's a long road. And that's impressive because, as you know, things change and they move, but the kind of ultimate goal may be, not really apparent right now. And I contrast that to this time I was teaching somewhere in a foundation, and they had seated me in this room where I was facing on the wall in giant letters, if you can't measure it, it didn't happen. And I kept pondering that, and I brought it up that day in the class because on the one hand, I understand that if you're a foundation and you're giving away money, you want to understand that it's not being wasted in some way. But I kept saying, well, what about if you educate a child and you don't see the result for 20 years? Or what about those sort of ripple effects that we never even think to measure? It seems like it's an interesting kind of balancing act, to have clear goals and accomplishments, but at the same time, to have a much bigger vision.
Yes, that's so true. That's so true. And I think, for us at ICT, we have we are very fortunate of having, the example of His Holiness the Dalai Lama as a guiding, light for us. And if you think about what he has gone through his life, losing his country when he was, a little more than a teenager, and being in exile for, over 60 years, and having to go through, with the responsibility, the expectation from your own people, but also, the expectation from your own teachings that you need to be part of a wider world and you have to share this with the world. So being able to find some inner balance and, resilience to go through all these, I think it is part of, genuine, social change. And, living in societies where everything is measured, sometimes from a business point of view. There are things that you cannot measure change, social change, like a business. You have to have, a better understanding of how human interactions and human societies evolve and, keep, that optimistic outlook and vision that, that you have to go through difficult times, but there is, a chance for progress. And this is a moment in which, many of us, all of us, we are living through difficult moments. Some of us are luckier. We have kept our job. We are able to, to continue our lives more or less from the material point of view in the same way. There are others who are less fortunate, and maybe there are some of those who are watching. So I wanted to ask you if you have, any advice, for people who are maybe more stressed out these days. Maybe they are in this moment a little bit less fortunate. How do you keep a positive outlook to your life?
Well, I think that the thing I say to myself, and to others is resilience doesn't mean you never fall down. It means you can pick yourself up. Because sometimes we add to the really difficult circumstance kind of image of perfectionism, that we need to never freak out or be a little more poised about things, and it's just not true. We will be frightened, or we will feel overcome, or we'll be very reactive. But we can learn that it's not helpful to dwell in those spaces, to rehearse them and get into them and decide, well, that's the ultimate truth. Many evolutionary biologists would say, anyway, we have a negativity bias. We're kind of trained biologically, genetically, to look for danger, to look for threat, to look for warnings. And sometimes we think that's all there is, and especially when things are so hard and harder for some people who may also feel left out or overlooked in the conversation. So many people have started conversations with me, for example, saying, well, we're all isolated at home. And I said, well, we're not all isolated at home, actually. Some people are going out to work, like I've talked to those ambulance drivers and people like that. And it's very easy to feel, well, no one's thinking about me, in my situation, because it's true, and so it's finding the inner strength and understanding that the stress dynamic is a dynamic. There's the pressure, the circumstance, which might be awful, the situation, and then there's the resource with which it's met. And some part of resource is having a community, not feeling so alone. And some part of it is really inner strength. And it's seeing, well, things are really hard now, but look at that. I also have the habit of believing they can never change. That's not helpful. Or I just sit and go through my list of grievances all day long. That's not that helpful either. Or I blame myself, whereas, this is like a worldwide situation of causes and conditions, but I somehow feel like I brought it all on myself. And, so we look for those ways in which we actually can build a stronger sense of inner resource and not just buy into that particular way of thinking. And then at least we have some strength with which to meet what's going on.
Thank you. And as we call back Tencho to see if we have, a few questions from our audience or comments, I just wanted to ask you to share maybe with our viewers, if people want to learn more about meditation practice or about what you specifically do, how can they reach you, where they can find out more on the internet or?
Yeah, probably the easiest thing is SharonSalzberg.com because it's all on there. You just have to make sure your spell check doesn't change Salzburg to be like the city, because it's not. My name is spelled Salzberg. I've never been to Salzburg, but maybe someday if we ever travel again.
Okay, great. Here is Tencho.
Yeah. Yes, I'm here. So thank you so much. That was very interesting listening to both of you. And thank you, Sharon. We have a number of viewers watching. And we have a question. Our first question comes from Hillary Levin, who's very close with all of our staff here. And Hillary's sent a question by email. She says, COVID has created a kind of self-imposed retreat for most of us, spending more times in our homes with fewer options to socialize in person or travel. Like so many, I have found it extremely difficult at times. Every day is a challenge to maintain some sanity. Can you please talk about how to turn this stress into an opportunity to deepen one's practice on the Buddhist path?
Yes, thank you for that. There's actually a word, anthropause, means the earth has gotten quieter. Seismologists and people who listen for earthquakes, which I guess is a sound variation, they say the earth has gotten quieter. And so the challenge, of course, is for us to get quieter. And I think here, too, we can't have like unreasonable expectations, in the beginning of being at home and not ever leaving. I was quoting somebody I had heard somewhere saying, I always thought if I only had the time, I would really clean my house. Turned out that wasn't actually the problem. I didn't really clean my house top to bottom. I didn't learn Spanish, which I thought I would. But we can actually determine on a structure. And I think that's the hard part, is it's such an unstructured life for many people, and we have to create a structure, and we can, and I think it would be wonderful to create a structure of study, for example, and there are many resources to decide what you want to pursue. It could be learning a language, if you want, or it could be the actual teachings. Join a meditation group if there's one available that feels right to you. And Like I said, I'm very passionate about voting, and so I've been going to groups where we all sit together and then write letters to voters, and that's about to come to an end. But there are also groups that one can find that have very specific sort of flavors that way. And I think it would be good to do. Once you've joined, then there's some sense of accountability. Also a good thing, because it's such a crazy unstructured time that you think, oh, well, there were only 8 people in that group. If I never show up, they're going to notice, like, maybe I'll show up.
That's very true, trying to find structure in the midst of all of these, as we also find working from home, even though we have more time. Sometimes the day just goes by before you get anything done. So I'm confessing to that, Matteo. Our next question comes from Kunten Yatso. Kundela is asking, can meditation help to transform the minds of world leaders to become better persons?
I believe it could if they did it. I think that's the gap. Somebody once asked me, I think I put this in the book as well. Someone once asked me a very kind of interesting question. They said that when they look at their own minds, they realize that when they are in pain of some kind or disconnected or deluded, basically, not really seeing the reality of things, that's when they cause pain to others. And so they understand that action that they might take is coming from a painful place within themselves. But they look at some of these world leaders and they don't seem to be suffering. They seem, not always, sometimes they do actually, but they don't always seem to be suffering. Sometimes they look very pleased with themselves. And so he was having a hard time feeling any compassion in that way. And actually, I happened to be sitting on a stage in Berkeley, California, with probably 12 other presenters, and nobody said a word when this question came up. And finally, I answered, and I said, I agree with you, that it's very hard. And sometimes I look at people and I think, if you could only fray a little bit at the edges, then I could feel, oh yeah, you're really suffering. But I do believe 2 things. One is I believe if we look at our own experience, that becomes the laboratory for understanding others. And I do believe we act to inflict harm coming from a place of pain within, of disconnection, of delusion, and so on. And I also believe, and this is a reflection of His Holiness' offerings, and certainly the Buddhist teaching, that a human being can be of greatness of heart. We don't have to settle for being mediocre or ordinary. We are capable of so much. And the choices people make, sometimes it seems to be in control and hurt others and be the best in a weird sort of way. And I think that's really sad, that in the end, those are the choices you make. And so I do feel a kind of compassion as well. And so far, nobody's asked of that kind. A person is asked to truly meditate, so I can't really help.
Okay. Our next question comes from a Facebook viewer, Sarah Helena Burke. And Sarah's question is, it seems to me that often people in the West who practice Tibetan Buddhism are quite unpolitical. Do you think that Buddhists and meditation centers, and especially Tibetan Buddhist centers, should put a stronger emphasis on practicing compassion through action by promoting political support for Tibet and to keep the very culture they benefit from alive and educate them more about the conflict with China?
Well, I think education is always good, truly, and I'm not sure I've had exactly the same experience, but I think, I think it can be approached in a lot of different ways. I think Westerners in general might not have much sense of lineage, for example. And so understanding, like somebody once said to me, because most of my writing and teaching is about a particular meditation meditation technique called lovingkindness. And so I was teaching somewhere, and somebody once said to me, "This stuff is incredible. When did you make it up?" And I said, "Well, I didn't really make anything up, and you're lucky. Actually, I didn't make anything up." But that's sort of how we are, and to understand there's lineages. This is ancient. There was the Buddha. There are cultures that have devoted themselves to preserving these teachings. There are people who have devoted themselves to preserving and transmitting these teachings. That's the only reason that we could be sitting in, I think we were in Connecticut, and that they're available to us, that we can experiment with. And so I think that's a place also of education and just reminding people, this didn't just happen in a workshop, weekend or something like that. This came from somewhere. And what does it mean now to be a Tibetan person in Tibet? What does it mean to be a Tibetan person outside of Tibet? What does it mean for the further transmission of these teachings? And I think that would help a lot, actually.
Yep, and His Holiness always tells us safeguarding, helping Tibet also safeguards this culture that has something to contribute to the world. And, he always says, you don't have to be, with these teachings, you can be a better Jew, you can be a better Christian, you can be a better Muslim. You don't have to be a Buddhist to learn and these practices and benefit from them. So what you've done is exactly kind of what His Holiness has been talking about. And one of our viewers also put a comment here. It says, Sharon, people like you keep the hope alive. Thank you for supporting Tibet. She says, you, Jack Cornfield, Ram Das. So she says, thank you. There was a comment there.
Thank you.
So my last question is from Nicola Richter. And Matteo, that you may answer this also. She says, Sharon, thank you so much for sharing your deep reflections. And she says, could you suggest 3 meaningful actions, and says, thank you, Matteo, also, which each of us could do to affect change to contribute to free Tibet?
Oh, I'm going to turn this over to Matteo for some expertise.
Thank you, Nicola. And I think, there are, as Sharon mentioned, nothing is too small, in terms of action when you want to affect change. We are a community of, over 100,000 people all over the world. We have, 3 offices also in Europe, and there are other Tibet support groups all over the world. So one way to contribute, join one of these groups, become a member, make a donation, it's $5, it's $500, whatever you can give, be part of this community. And when you become part of that, I guess, Nicola, you are one of our, members or supporters. I mean, there are things we're now doing, and it's a very critical time for us, because we have one bill which is currently in Congress, which passed the House at the beginning of the year. It's called the Tibetan Policy and Support Act. And this bill basically updates overall U.S. policy on Tibet, trying to strengthen some of the provisions there. And one key provision is to make sure that the U.S. government will make efforts both at the national level but internationally not to allow China to continue to control the Tibetan Buddhist reincarnation system, and specifically their plans to select a future Dalai Lama. Because unfortunately, they have already passed official regulations in which they have established that it's up to them, in their view, to select a future Dalai Lama. And clearly, this is going, to be part of a larger attempt by China to totally control Tibetan Buddhism. And if the world allows that to happen, that is not going to, impact only Tibetans in Tibet. It's going to impact, Tibetan Buddhism and Buddhist culture all over the world. This is an issue naturally, for Buddhist practitioners should be very close, to your heart. As His Holiness is one of the most important teachers for sure in Tibetan Buddhism. But in general, it's a basic principle of religious freedom, of freedom of conscience, that you cannot allow any government to dictate who should be the leader of a spiritual practice. And so that is something that you can do. You can go to our website. I think it's safetibet.org/TPSA, which is the acronym for the bill, which is in Congress, and you can sign a petition to your senator in particular, because now the bill is in the Senate. And as you can imagine, this is not the easiest time to try to pass anything in the Senate. And so we are waiting to see if we can. We are still optimistic that we can make it before the end.
We have till the end of the year, yes, Matteo?
Yeah, till the end of the year. So let's see what happens, with the elections in 2 weeks, and then after that, Congress will be back. But we need all your support. So these are concrete ways in which you can contribute, and you can find more on our website on safetibet.org.
All right, that brings us to the end of our conversation with Sharon Salzberg. Sharon, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you, Matteo, for moderating that conversation. We learned a lot, and really enjoyed listening to you. Thank you both.
Thank you. Thank you.
No, thank you so much. It's a little bit like being back there. It's wonderful.
Yes, thank you, Sharon.
Hope to see you soon in person.
Yes. Okay.
Bye.
So thank you, everyone, for joining. I really hope you enjoyed that conversation. And as our speaker said today, step by step, ripple effects, your support for Tibet. With your support, we will make progress as we move along. We will have more upcoming talks posted soon on our website at safetibet.org/live. And you'll also find links to all our previous shows there. We are also now, we have a podcast available, and for information, you can go to safetibet.org/pod. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for your support for Tibet, and we'll see you again very soon.